much for having me here. Failure is not an option. It's a fact. And we as developers know that. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. So a little bit about me. I'm from Mexico. That's the accent. I live in Switzerland. I work for JFrog. I'm a software developer. My tool of choice is Java. I'm a Java champion. I participate in a lot of foundations. Open source is my passion too. And I have collaborated in some books. The latest one was DevOps tools for Java developers because I'm a Java developer. So let me start with two statements that I find them to be super true in my life. I'm a developer. When people ask me, why are you a developer? What does developer mean? And I've said, you know, it's not about computers. At the core, it's about humans, because we're humans writing code for humans. And you will say, like, no. But let me tell you that we spend more time reading code that was not written by us than actually writing it. And sometimes that person that wrote that code, it's ourselves 10 months ago, and when we read it, we're like, what was I thinking? Or maybe, was I even thinking? Anyway, so human life, humans writing code for humans, and the purpose of it should be improve human life. But the other thing that I know is never send a human to do a machine's job. And we are, in our industry, we are in both of these situations. But what I wanted to talk today about is failure. Because we have this very strange relationship with failure as society. But we have even a more strange relationship in technology. So what is failure? If we go to etymologies, it means from deceive, lie, even the physical activity of almost falling down. But when I say failure, and when I face failure, this is the reaction that most of us have. We feel depressed, trapped. We feel that everything is closing on us. It's not a nice feeling. We feel isolated. And these emotions sometimes are so powerful that they actually affect our physical health. And this is one of the examples how it actually affects our physical health. When people suffer trauma, their hearts may change shape. And it is measurable. So emotional pain has physical impacts. And I'm not saying stress, etc., because we all know that. But this is measurable. And during the last decades, we have had this shift on view how we fail, how we actually see failure. And for example, John Bowers, on this particular TED Talk, he's telling, society has moved away from perfection. And now everybody gets a gold medal just because you tried. So he's saying we are living the consequences of being good enough. And he says, in my industry, he actually has a company that is training truckers. He says, when I talked about the 0.001% of error, that actually means lives. So I'm aiming for perfection. On the other hand, we have another talk, and this is closer to our industry. Astro Taylor, he is part of the Moonshot factory from Alphabet. And then he describes how every single day their engineers will sit down and try to make their projects fail. That's their objective. They will get vacations. They will get bonuses. They will have a round of applause if they make their project fail that day. Quite interesting, isn't it? Let's continue. Failure in IT. This is our industry. How good are we at this? This is a paper for 2011. And why do you think our IT projects maybe, or are risky? So probably you know it by a gut feeling, but if you want the numbers, you can actually look into these papers. By the way, if you see the QR codes, that's the link for every single paper or article that I have. And believe me, I have several. And the slides will also be available later on. So in our IT industry, we have a high number of projects that actually fail. The concept of black swans in the IT industry, it doesn't exist. Everything is a black swan. So we don't have black swans. And for example, 1 in 6 projects had an overrun of 200%, and on average, in the schedule, at 70%. So we are not only delivering, overrunning our budget later than expected, and sometimes even we are not fulfilling the requirements or the features that were requested. So overall, we are in one of the most riskiest industry for planning projects. And let me remind you, every industry, every company out there, it's a software company. So we are in a very risky industry that actually touches everybody's life. And you will actually tell me, Ixchel, that was a study from 2011. So things, of course, have improved. Same authors, 10 years later, no, it hasn't been improved. Actually, this one, it's over 5,000 IT projects in 66 countries, 6 continents. They review the costs of more than 4,000 projects. And when researchers use distrusses IT projects, like, usually researchers are very, very controlled in the terminology that they use. And when I was reading the paper, and I saw that word, and I said, okay, so we're not improving. But they have a good insight on what could be the problem with IT projects. Actually, in the previous paper, if you want to read it, they actually go into what are the main causes of running IT projects. I'm not going into that. That's a session in itself, but I totally recommend it to you. But one of the important things in this latest project from last year is that the interdependency of the different modules in creating systems is one of the keys why we are failing more recently. Let's continue with failure in IT. Because I said, we have this very, very strange relationship. And who doesn't here has heard run fast, fail often, never trust a test that you haven't seen failed. So we actually create a myriad of tests, unit test, integration test, contractor, provider, end-to-end, you name it. And some people, some developers love it, some hate it, but it has to be there. And our relationship is so good that we actually make them good, nice. Disclosure, I have been coming here to Denmark because I love Groovy, and there used to be a conference here, GreatConf. So that's why this is my favorite testing library. Anyway, let's continue. The other place where we are failing a lot, it's security. And we're starting to bring security into the life of developers. Because when we figure out that we have a security problem, when we detect it, let me tell you, it's already too late. We are already running around. We are already facing the costs of detecting something that is super important too late. So we need to shift it as soon as possible to the left, to developers, not to figure it out after the fact. But then, developers start running the tools that tell them about the vulnerabilities. And let me tell you, I have run vulnerabilities on my projects, and that is a freaking Christmas tree. And then they tell me, Ixchel, we cannot ship anything that has a critical vulnerability. And I said, okay, so where do I use the time, or where do I take the time for solving the 100 critical vulnerabilities that I have in my freaking tree? And the answer is usually, I don't know, you figure it out. I'm like, I'm not a security expert. Like, honestly, I already do a lot. Like, as a developer, as a Java developer, I have to work on so many things. And on top of that, you want me to be a security expert, which is not a trivial activity to do. And then things like that appear, and then they say, well, of those 100 that you probably are identified, most of them are really difficult to exploit. They require complex configuration, so don't focus on that. So you see, and I totally understand, I'm a developer, I work in the DevOps space. So this is when we have to play better with our colleagues. We have to help us in deciding what, where, how, and what. So failure, is it this or is it this? At that point, I had so many questions about failure until I figured out that there was another really good article. This is the 2011 issue for the Harvard Business Review about failure. They actually go into a lot of types of failure, like the social, the design, the political, etc., and how we should approach all those. And one of the interesting things that I talked about is the nature of failure. And for me, like, I'm an engineer, so when I have questions, I go really deep into the literature, into trying to learn. So not all failures, nature of failure, not all failures are created equally. And they detected that there are mainly 3 types of failure: preventable, complexity-related, and intelligent. So what are the preventable failures? The preventable failures, this is the ones that you want to avoid. This won't teach you anything. These are the ones that you should work really fast on them. Because even if I'm here talking to you about failure, this is not a glorification of failure. Because nowadays, a lot of people out there that are really successful, they always talked about their failures. So now we have this rhetoric in our minds, this narrative, that if you fail, you're going to succeed. And let me tell you, if you fail, you can stay in failure. Succeeding requires that you do something. And from these failures, all the failures that you can be around, they are the ones that won't actually help you move to success. So this is the one that you should try to avoid at all costs. And this is when we said, automate. Automate everything that can be automated. Because when you introduce a human factor into a very potentially automated process, you're introducing all the creativity, but all the possibility to fail. Because we're humans. Complexity related, this is the second type of failure, where it's a little bit more difficult to learn from them. Because even when we are writing tests, and all the myriad of types of tests that I described, writing tests, except for mutated tests, that we can talk about that later, but they are framed by our own imaginations of what things can go wrong. And again, they are framed on human imagination, which can be very creative, grant you that. But we still need to imagine them. So this is about things that usually we don't imagine, or we don't want to take the time because it's so rare, the black swans. And finally, this is the type of failure where you really need to work on, the ones that you want to have, the ones that are considered good because you're risking something. You're trying to develop a better service, a better way of doing it, a better product, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the ones that will get you ahead, either in pharmaceuticals, developing new drugs, either in your own services. Maybe your users require different kind of presentation. Think A/B testing and booking. That's what they are doing here. But the most important part, I mean, we already have failure. We are surrounded by failure. There are failures that won't allow us to move to success, and there are failures that allow us to move. But for us to be moving, we need to have a learning process. And turns out that learning, even if we have to do it continuously, it's not so easy. And there are several sessions that I can recommend you later on about failure in IT. But in this particular paper, they are telling us about what are the main conditions or the main steps. We need to identify it. We need to analyze it. And we need to experiment. And you said, Ixchel, that's common sense. Yes, but like a diet, it's very difficult to stick to them. So the first thing is that we have to recognize the small failures, not only the big ones, the ones that explode in our heads. No, you have to have a process of recognizing those small failures. You need to understand them. How many of you have a post-mortem in, like, not a retrospective? I'm not talking about retrospectives, I'm talking a post-mortem. What happened? Why did it happen? And not only that, how whatever we learn from here is going to actually change what we are doing now. Because we have retrospectives, we have postmortems, and then we have all these really nice reports that get only to sit down on the desk of somebody, but never to be read, never to be actionized. And then we have to design experiments. A lot of people have heard about, like, if there is something that is good for you, but it still creates pain, do it more often. And I have mixed feelings about that particular phrase, but the point is, create the circumstances and experiments for the solution to actually happen, and you know how to react in the next edition of this. Okay, so we need to learn. We know how to learn. Let's assume that. But there is also something really important. How fast we learn, it's really, really crucial. So there's, for example, the tipping point between failure and success. And guess what? There is a paper about it. So in this particular paper, they figure out there are two types of people. The ones that, even if it's an intelligent failure, even if they are ready to learn, even they know how to learn, they still don't learn. They still don't improve. What is the reason why they do not improve? Because they don't learn fast enough. So they stay in what is called the stagnation point. And the ones that actually move from failure to success are the ones that fail faster and faster, and they learn faster and faster. When they can curate all that information that they are acquiring, and they can distill something for the next editions. So here in DevOps is what we call create more feedback loops. Create more important metadata. Be more insightful about what is happening. Be consistent. Normalize your data. Curate your data. Let's see that I'm failing in the right way. I'm learning. I'm learning fast enough to move from from failure to success. How do I actually even improve the return of investment in failure? And you guessed it right, there is a paper for that. So how do we do that? We need to learn from every failure, share the lessons, and review your patterns of failure. Because what failed today, or what is okay today, may not continue tomorrow. And that's exactly why we are always scanning the artifact that we are creating, because every single day there is a new CVE. So we have to continuously doing this and continuously reviewing what success is or what failure is. But nothing that I have talked about so far cannot happen or would not happen if there is no psychological safety in your teams. And you know it. We are here because we are practitioners of DevOps. And we know that DevOps, first and foremost, it's a cultural shift. So if in your teams this word hasn't appeared, maybe it's the time for you to go back and say, we need psychological safety in our teams. Who here doesn't know what psychological safety is? Okay, perfect. And I love it. Thank you very much. So psychological safety, some people think that it's about trust. And that you trust that you are in a nice environment where you can raise your hand and say, doom await us, and you're wrong. It's kind of that, but it's not trust, because trust is between two individuals. Psychological safety, it's an environment, like our open spaces, and like this conference trying to do. A place where you can interact, voice your concerns, ask for questions, or say, I don't know. And that won't have a detriment or a bad outcome on you. That's a psychological safety environment. In this particular paper, if you want to read it, there is an example between hospitals. And for example, how is the rate of deaths in hospitals that they don't practice psychological safety between the nurses and the doctors, or how they even approach surgeries. And let me tell you, and I told my husband, the next time I land in a hospital, I'm going to ask the nurse. And she doesn't know these concepts, we're checking out. I'm leaving. That important is for me psychological safety in all teams. So it's a climate in which people are comfortable being and expressing themselves. So I already show you a little bit how these failures actually are in our own industry. But let's talk a little bit about our software development cycle. And of course, I don't have to explain you this particular image. But let's go back at trying to think about how or where our failures are. Like where can we improve our interaction in the software development cycle, and how we can actually reduce the number of failures that are preventable. How do we extract as much information for the ones that are complexity related, and how do we actually help or interact with the intelligent ones? So, of course, I work for JFrog, and obviously you know us, because we sit down as the database of DevOps. So, and I can go on and tell you, we work with single source of truth, we work with security, but the one thing that I want you to really see here is that in DevOps, we need to extract, of course, extract as much information as we can of our processes. Automate whatever we can automate. Review that automation every single time, because we have enough feedback loops that provide us insight into all our workflow. On the other hand, in the actual terms of the code that we are writing, we want to work with our developers and tell them, these are the set of information that you actually require, that we, from the entire group of stakeholders, we are providing you that it's important for you to do your daily jobs without compliance knocking at your door and telling you we have a problem. So I hope that this session, even though it was a little bit fast because this is usually a 45-minute session, has given you a different perspective on failure in our industry and help you choose the right tools, or at least ask the right questions in your own development team. Because honestly, we suck at predicting. And this particular thing, well, not this one particularly, but shows how we have to adapt. And to adapt fast, we need to see clear. We need to know what we're doing, and we need to do what is needed. Because we are always facing crossroads in our industry, and we still need to move forward, always. And we should never, never stop learning to be successful. So I hope at least this session has given you a different perspective and a lot of background material to review. All those papers are awesome. Because not everything is as it seems. So you need to have clear eyes every single time that you approach a problem, even if you think you know what is the answer. And I hope you enjoyed this session. And this is the most important QR code ever. So this is the one that I actually want you to scan. This is actually the one that helps me a lot, because I'm asking you for your feedback and to connect with me, ask me questions. And if you have any questions, I will actually stay the entire day here for the open spaces or around the conference. So thank you very much. And I don't see a lot of phones scanning the QR code. Just mentioning that. Well, thank you very much.